Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet journey into the past. You found your way to Sleepy Historian, a place where stories of long ago are told in a way meant not to excite, but to soothe. This is boring history for sleep. Calm narration that invites you to drift gently toward rest. Some of you may already know the rhythm here. Falling asleep to boring history, bedtime relaxation, soft storytelling, a soft-spoken history documentary. Others may be new, searching for calm bedtime storytelling, relaxing history to fall asleep to, or perhaps a history sleep story that allows the mind to wander until sleep takes over. Whatever brought you here, you are welcome. If this kind of storytelling helps you find peace at night, you are invited to stay. Perhaps give a video a like or subscribe, but only if it truly brings you rest. I would love to know, too, where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There's something quietly comforting about realizing that across the world, in many different places, others are drifting off at the very same moment, letting these gentle histories become their last thoughts before dreams. Share that in the comments if you wish. And perhaps someone else reading will find comfort in the thought of not being alone. Tonight's story takes us back to a world before electric light. Imagine it. Streets dark but with a faint glow from windows. Homes lit only by a small flame. Shadows stretching and shifting with each flicker. Candlelight was more than a source of brightness. It was a shaper of lives. By its glow, letters were written, books were read, secrets were whispered, and discoveries slowly unfolded. In this video, jaw-dropping ways candlelight changed the world, we'll explore how something so fragile and ordinary could alter human history in profound and lasting ways. Together, we will move gently through 4 chapters. First, we'll step into daily life, imagining the role of candles in ordinary medieval households. Then, we'll follow the story of a remarkable figure whose work was shaped by the glow flame. From there, we'll look at mystery, archaeology, and culture, how candles became symbols of ritual secrecy and spiritual life. Finally, we'll contrast the experiences of common people with those of elites, whose nights glowed with far more than a single wick. Through it all, the tone will remain quiet, steady, and restful, a way for you to explore history without urgency. You may find your mind drifting, your thoughts wandering, your eyes growing heavy. That is not only expected, it is welcome, whether you stay awake to hear the whole tale or fall asleep midway. This story will continue without demanding your attention, so let the light dim. Imagine the soft flicker of a candle nearby, its flame steady yet fragile, its glow enough to soften the edges of the room. Settle into stillness, breathe slowly, and let us begin our journey into the long, gentle influence of candlelight on the world. Imagine yourself stepping into a medieval home at dusk. The sky outside has grown dim, shadows pooling in the corners of narrow streets, and within the house, the day's final tasks must be done before true darkness settles. There is no switch to press, no flood of electric light to banish the night. Instead, a single candle is struck to life, its tiny flame pushing back against the weight of the dark. This small flame is not simply a convenience. It is a necessity, a presence that defines the rhythm of the household. The candle stands at the center of the evening, dictating when meals may be eaten, when work may continue, and when conversation can linger just a little longer. Its light is faint, a soft halo of gold that barely fills a space. Shadows cling to the corners, and the faces around the room flicker in and out of brightness, half seen, half imagined. Candles in medieval Europe were often made of tallow, a rendered animal fat that gave off a smoky, uneven glow. The scent was heavy, a mixture of oil and char, clinging to the walls and clothing. Only the wealthiest households could afford beeswax candles, which burned clean and bright, filling the air with a faintly sweet fragrance. To light a beeswax candle was a small luxury, a sign of privilege, and it might be reserved for holy days, for feasts, or for the most important of family gatherings. For most, the tallow candle was enough. Picture a family gathered for supper. A wooden table set simply with bread, perhaps a stew, and a jug of ale. The candle rests near the center, and every gesture must be made within its modest circle of light. A hand reaching for a loaf, a spoon lifted toward the mouth, the turning of a head, all appear and disappear as the flame dances. Eating is both an act of nourishment and one of coordination, for outside the glow, bowls and plates are easily lost in shadow. The candle also shaped the way work was done. Craftsmen who wish to continue after sunset will rely on the flame to guide their hands, whether weaving, stitching, or carving. But the light was too weak for intricate tasks, and so much of life bowed to the hours of the sun. This rhythm of day and night was absolute. Candlelight could stretch the day, but never replace it. Even the wealthiest, with more candles to burn, still live in a world where the dark was always pressing near. Children might sit close, their faces tilted toward the glow as they listened to stories told by parents or elders. These stories, passed from one generation to the next, were woven into the flickering light. Shadows made the tales come alive, shapes moving against the wall, transforming a simple evening into something half magical. For many, these moments of quiet storytelling became the essence of family life, the memories that lingered long after. And then there was reading and writing. For the few who were literate, the candle made possible the slow work of letters. Monks, scribes, and scholars often strained their eyes by candlelight, copying manuscripts or composing thoughts late into the night. At home, a merchant might tally his accounts, a clerk might review a contract, or a student might trace unfamiliar words. The flame was not simply light. It was a bridge to knowledge, fragile and fleeting. Of course, candlelight was not without danger. An overturned flame could easily set rushes or straw alight, and whole streets were vulnerable to fire. Rules and ordinances sometimes restricted the use of candles in certain settings, particularly inns and communal spaces, where a single accident could cause disaster. Still, necessity overruled fear, and the flame remained companion to every evening. As night deepened, the candle marked the passage of time. Wax melted and dripped, pooling at the base, a quiet reminder that light was finite. To watch a candle burn down was to feel the hours slip away. Some households even measured time this way, carving marks into wax, or observing how long it took a flame to consume a certain length. Time itself was often blurred, measured not in minutes or hours, but in wax and wick. Eventually, the candle would be snuffed out. Darkness returned, thick and absolute, and the household surrendered to sleep. In those moments, the fragility of light was fully understood. How small, how precious, and how fleeting it truly was. This was the daily rhythm of candlelight, a cycle of flame and shadow, of work and rest, of presence and absence. It was ordinary, and yet, in its ordinariness, it shaped the very texture of life. Imagine the streets of a medieval town as night falls. The bustle of markets is quieted, shutters drawn against the evening air. Yet here and there, faint pools of light still linger. A baker may rise long before dawn, tending his oven with the help of a stub of candle. A cobbler may lean close to his workbench, stitching leather by a flame that is more shadow than clarity. The candle became a silent partner in countless trades, extending the boundaries of work, even if only slightly. Workshops were often cramped, filled with the smell of wood shavings, dye, or molten metal. In these dim spaces, a single candle seemed to hold the night at bay, but candlelight distorted perception. Shadows grew tall, lines blurred, and craftsmen learned to adapt. Mistakes were common, and many tasks were reserved for daylight hours. Still, for those who wish to push beyond sunset, the candle offered a fragile allowance. In households, candles guided the rhythm of chores. Women might spin by the light of a flickering wick, the fibers appearing silver as they twisted between fingers. Laundry, carried in from the day, might be folded in a soft glow. These quiet labors were rarely recorded in chronicles, yet they filled countless hours, and the candle was their companion. Without it, much of life would have halted with the sinking sun. Yet beyond work, candlelight held a deeply symbolic place in worship. Step into a medieval church at Vespers, the evening prayer. The vast space is hushed, filled with a scent of stone and incense. At the altar, beeswax candles burn steadily, their flames upright and bright. Unlike tallow, they do not smoke or sputter. Their light seems pure, steady, and almost otherworldly. For centuries, candles in Christian ritual symbolize divine presence, prayers carried upward with each wisp of smoke. Imagine the scene of a procession, winding slowly through narrow streets, each participant holding a candle. The small flames bob in the night air, a river of light threading through the darkness. For those watching, the sight is both ordinary and transcendent, a reminder that light was more than practical. It was sacred. Festivals, vigils, and holy days all leaned upon candlelight to create atmosphere, to mark the boundary between profane and the divine. Candles also found their way into community gatherings, in inns and taverns, where neighbors came together for food, drink, and news. Light was a shared resource. A handful of candles might illuminate a table where dice clattered, mugs clinked, and stories unraveled. The glow softened faces, hid wrinkles, and added a certain warmth to conversation. Yet rules were sometimes strict. A landlord might forbid too many candles for fear of fire, or charge extra for their use. The flame was communal, but it was also an expense to be measured. In wealthier circles, the candle could even be a marker of status. Banquets were not merely feasts, but displays of light. Long tables might be lined with dozens of candles, creating an almost theatrical setting. Guests would enter to find a hall glowing, shadows dancing on carved beams, silver dishes gleaming in reflected flame. The abundance of light spoke silently of wealth, of power, and of mastery over the darkness. Where one candle sufficed for a peasant, a nobleman might summon 100. Candles also carried meaning in moments of uncertainty. When illness struck, a candle might be lit at the bedside, a fragile guardian against the unknown. During storms, when the wind howled outside and shutters rattled, families might cluster close to a flame, its steadiness a comfort. In many households, a candle was placed in a window to guide travelers home, a silent beacon across fields or narrow lanes. And yet, despite its presence, candlelight never banished the dark entirely. It softened it, delayed it, offered reprieve, but always in limited measure. The medieval world was one where darkness was a constant companion, and a candle was companion too, delicate, temporary, endlessly consumed in its service. The rhythm of work, worship, and community all leaned on this simple source of light. A candle marked the difference between gathering and dispersing, between ritual and routine, between solitude and shared presence. It was never more than a small flame, and yet it was enough to shape the course of every evening. When the day's labor had ended and the marketplace was still, the candle remained. It was not only a tool for work or worship, but also for the quiet intimacies of daily life. Imagine a family gathered around a small wooden table. The evening meal finished, the remnants of bread and broth pushed aside. A single candle burns in the center. Its light softens the rough edges of bowls, makes the sheen of pottery glow, and paints each face in hues of gold and shadow. This was a common scene, unremarkable to those who lived it, yet deeply shaped by the presence of flame. Candles ordered time in subtle ways. Some households measured the passing of hours by how quickly a candle diminished. A stick of tallow might last only a short while, marking the boundary between tasks. In monasteries, more carefully made candles could be calibrated. so that 1 hour's burning was roughly predictable. Before the precision of clocks, such devices allowed monks to pray at intervals, to rise and kneel at regular hours. The flame was both a source of light and of discipline. Children, too, grew up with candles as quiet companions. Many learned their letters by candlelight, tracing words on wax tablets or parchment. The effort strained the eyes, but it gave knowledge a fragile glow, as though learning itself depended upon the flame. Bedtime stories were told in this dim atmosphere as well. A parent might lean close, voice hushed, weaving tales while the candle sputtered. Shadows would creep across the walls, becoming part of the story, until drowsiness overcame both listener and teller. In wealthier homes, candlelight also shaped entertainment. Minstrels performed in great halls, their music accompanied by the flicker of dozens of wicks. Poetry was read aloud, lines drifting into the soft light, while listeners reclined on cushions or benches. In these spaces, the abundance of candles was itself a form of spectacle. The more flames burned, the more lavish the host appeared. Guests might leave not only recalling the verses sung, but also the glow of the room, the shimmering play of gold leaf and fabric under steady light. Yet for the majority, candles were rationed carefully. Often, they were saved for necessity, meals, work, or prayer, and darkness remained the default condition. Villagers might go to bed soon after sunset, adjusting their lives to daylight's rhythm. The candle was not an instrument for conquering the night, but a brief extension of it. Many evenings ended early simply because wax and tallow were too precious to waste. Darkness was not merely absence. It was an environment, one that shaped human routine as surely as daylight. There were also beliefs tied to candlelight in these intimate spaces. Some saw a guttering flame as an omen, a sign of spirits or of change to come. Others kept a candle burning through the night to ward off misfortune, believing its glow offered protection. Superstitions varied from village to village, yet the flame was rarely viewed as ordinary. It was small, delicate, and easily extinguished, and so it seemed linked to the fragile nature of life itself. Consider also the role of candles in marking life's milestones. At births, they were lit to welcome new life. At marriages, to symbolize unity. At deaths, to accompany the departed. In each case, the flame carried meaning beyond its function. It was a sign of continuity, of memory, of the presence of something beyond the immediate moment. A candle was there when people whispered vows, when they mourned loss, when they hoped for healing. And in the most private of settings, candlelight shaped intimacy. Couples might sit close together, their faces barely visible in the glow. Secrets were exchanged, plans whispered, and silences shared. In such moments, the flame did not simply illuminate. It created atmosphere, softened distance, made the ordinary appear tender. This was not grand history, recorded in chronicles or annals, but it was a history of living, repeated endlessly in humble rooms across centuries. As the wick burned low and the room grew dimmer, families often ended their day by snuffing out the candle. The sound was small, a faint hiss, and then darkness reclaimed the space. Sleep followed swiftly, for without light, the body surrendered to night. Thus, each day closed with a ritual, a flame lit, lived beside, and then extinguished. This quiet cycle, repeated in countless households, shows how candles were woven into most ordinary of human experiences. They were more than tools. They were markers of time, bearers of meaning, companions of both solitude and togetherness. In their fragile light, people worked, prayed, loved, and finally slept. And as each flame was extinguished, life yielded once again to the ancient rhythm of night. Imagine the quiet flicker of a candle, not in a peasant's cottage this time, but in the vaulted hall of a cathedral, its walls echoing with solemn chants. The flame illuminates stained glass windows, shimmering against pillars of stone. Behind this glow lies an intricate web of trade, economy, and influence. an entire network built on wax. Candles were not merely objects of daily use. They were commodities, symbols of status, and powerful tools in the shaping of medieval society. In many parts of Europe, beeswax was prized far above tallow. Its light was brighter, it scent cleaner, and it burned long without the thick smoke that filled small rooms when tallow was used. Beeswax was so valuable that it was often considered an offering in itself, a gift to monasteries or churches, and sometimes even a form of tax. To offer wax was to demonstrate both devotion and wealth. A poor family might bring a small taper at a festival, while a noble house could sponsor an entire chandelier of beeswax candles, each flame a visible sign of their influence. Behind every candle stood the beekeeper, an often overlooked figure in this story. Beekeeping was laborious, requiring careful attention to hives made of straw skeps or hollowed logs. Bees were unpredictable, their behavior sensitive to weather and season. A good harvest of wax depended on the skilled keeper, who watched carefully as bees gathered nectar from meadows and orchards. Honey was, of course, treasured, but the wax itself became an engine of commerce. Monasteries, in particular, managed vast apiaries, producing wax to supply not only their own needs, but also the demands of towns and noble patrons. Trade routes soon formed around this resource. Wax traveled along rivers, across mountains, through bustling markets. In the Hanseatic League, for example, merchants carried wax from the Baltic regions southward, feeding the insatiable appetite of churches and courts. Records show that barrels of wax were shipped alongside grain, timber, and furs, forming part of a thriving northern economy. For coastal cities, wax was not just an import, but also a re-export, passed further inland in exchange for textiles or wine. The importance of wax in religious ritual gave it a particularly elevated status. Cathedrals required immense quantities of candles. Services at dawn and dusk, vigils stretching through night, feast days marked by elaborate displays, all demanded a steady supply. In some cases, the very size of a church's candle stockpile was a measure of its prestige. Donations of wax were recorded meticulously, with benefactors' names inscribed in ledgers, their generosity remembered in prayer. Thus, wax became intertwined with memory, piety, and power. For rulers, too, candles offered opportunity. Kings and princes often made grand gestures by presenting wax to holy sites, ensuring both spiritual merit and public admiration. Some issued laws regulating the quality of candles, particularly in markets, to protect against fraud. Counterfeit candles, those mixed with cheaper fats or poorly made, were seen as not only dishonest, but disrespectful to the sanctity of light. Maintaining purity in wax was therefore a matter of both trade and morality. Yet, as with all valuable commodities, conflict was never far away. Rights to collect wax from peasants or monasteries were contested. In certain towns, guilds of chandlers, those who made candles, rose to prominence, controlling production and pricing. Apprenticeships were lengthy, and skills guarded closely. Chandlers knew the precise methods for rendering tallow, for molding beeswax, for wicking properly so that flames would not sputter or gutter too quickly. In their shops, the air was thick with the faint sweetness of wax, a scent that lingered on hands and garments. The candle trade also influenced architecture and urban life. With candles in demand, chandlers' workshops became familiar features of towns. Some even clustered near churches, ensuring that sacred ceremonies never lacked light. Their shops displayed candles of varying sizes. Tiny tapers for household use, thick pillars for altars, tall ceremonial tapers for great processions. In this diversity, one could glimpse the stratified nature of society. A peasant might afford only a stub, while a bishop commanded a sea of flames. Over time, wax gathered symbolic layers. It was not only material, but also a metaphor. The human soul compared to a wick, life likened to a candle burning steadily or faltering in the wind. Writers of sermons and moral texts frequently use these images, reinforcing the candle's role as both practical tool and spiritual lesson. Every flickering flame carried with it echoes of devotion, economy, and imagination. As you picture this, you may sense how a simple object, born from the labor of bees and the craft of chandlers, became entangled in the very fabric of medieval power. From the quiet work of tending hives to the grand display of candles blazing in a cathedral, wax shaped not only light, but also the flow of wealth and authority. The story of the candle is therefore also the story of trade, of labor, and of the ways humans imbued material with meaning. Imagine stepping into a medieval hall, prepared for a royal feast. Stone walls rise high around you, cold and unyielding, but the space glows with countless flames. Candles set in elaborate iron chandeliers hang overhead, while tall tapers stand in polished holders upon long wooden tables. The light dances upon silver goblets, gilded plates, and richly embroidered garments, softening shadows yet never banishing them entirely. In this carefully crafted glow, royalty displayed their grandeur, and candlelight itself became a language of power. In palaces and castles, candles were not only a necessity, but also a statement. A ruler's ability to fill a hall with beeswax tapers proclaimed wealth in the most visible of ways. Unlike smoky tallow, beeswax produced a clear, steady flame, leaving little residue on walls or ceilings. To flood a room with such light was extravagant, signaling resources that few could rival. For guests and envoys, the impression was unmistakable. Here was a sovereign whose coffers and influence reached far. Royal ceremonies were carefully staged to maximize this effect. At coronation, for instance, candles were placed in abundance, their flames symbolizing divine blessing and continuity. Chronicles describe vast processions where towering candles, taller than a man, were borne through cathedrals. These were not mere ornaments. They were messages of legitimacy, stability, and sacred authority. In some traditions, the length of the candle itself conveyed meaning, with towering tapers representing endurance and strength. Banquets, too, became theaters of light. Picture a feast in the court of Charles V of France or Edward III of England. Tables stretching the length of the hall, platters of roasted meats and fragrant stews, musicians playing softly in the gallery. What lent the evening its magical quality, however, was the shimmering of candlelight against jewel brooches and velvet sleeves. Courtiers moved in and out of shadows, their expressions half hidden, half revealed, as if playing roles upon a stage. To dine by candlelight was to enter a performance where every gesture and glance was heightened by the flicker of flame. Behind this magnificence lay careful orchestration. Servants, often overlooked, played essential roles in managing light. They trimmed wicks, replaced spent candles, and ensured that flames burned evenly throughout the night. Without them, a hall could quickly plunge into smoke or darkness. Accounts from household records reveal the expense. Hundreds, even thousands, of candles consumed in a single evening. Royal treasurers noted these costs. For wax was costly, and every flame had to be justified as part of the spectacle of rule. Candles also marked moments of private devotion within royal households. In chapels, small altars glowed with steady light as kings and queens knelt in prayer. Here, the symbolism was more intimate, yet no less significant. A solitary candle at dawn or dusk might reflect a monarch's hope for guidance or remembrance of the departed. In such quiet rituals, the same material that blazed so publicly in halls of power offered a softer, more contemplative illumination. The candle's role in court life extended beyond the purely spiritual and ceremonial. It also influenced diplomacy. Foreign envoys welcomed into glittering candlelit halls carried home impressions shaped as much by atmosphere as by words spoken. The careful glow softened faces, lending warmth to negotiations, or conversely, created an aura of mystery and majesty. In this way, candlelight itself became a subtle tool of politics. Over time, customs formed around the use of candles in courtly events. Some rulers commissioned candle holders of exquisite craftsmanship, studded with gems or wrought in intricate shapes of lions, eagles, or saints. These objects elevated flame into art, reinforcing the idea that even light itself belonged to the domain of kings. Inventories list chandeliers heavy with gold leaf, sconces shaped like flowering vines, and stands tall enough to rival the height of a knight. But candlelight also carried reminders of fragility. A draft could extinguish a flame, wax dripped and melted away, consumed by time. Writers of court often used this imagery in poetry or allegory, likening the brevity of life or the uncertainty of fortune to a candle that might gutter and vanish. Thus, even in the midst of royal grandeur, there was a quiet acknowledgement of impermanence. The same flicker that glorified a king's power whispered also of its eventual passing. By the late Middle Ages, as courts grew more sophisticated, candlelight was woven into pageantry with increasing complexity. Masks and entertainment staged in great halls relied on carefully arranged light to create mood. Shadows were manipulated, figures illuminated or obscured, to audiences and used artificial brilliance. These displays felt almost magical, a transformation of space and atmosphere achieved entirely by the dance of flames. As you imagine yourself standing in such a hall, with the soft waxen glow reflecting from armor and silk, consider how deeply candlelight shaped impressions of majesty. It was never just a means of seeing in the dark. It was a performance, a symbol, and a reminder. The wax harvested in distant apiaries, the careful craft of chandlers, the labor of servants trimming wicks, all converge to create a single, luminous message. Here stands power, enduring as long as a flame. Picture a quiet chapel deep within the heart of a castle. The stone walls absorb sound, and the only illumination comes from rows of flickering tapers. The air is rich with the faint scent of beeswax and incense, carrying the promise of stillness. In this soft radiance, kings, queens, and nobles perform the most solemn rituals of their lives. Candlelight did not merely brighten the space. It framed moments of devotion, mourning, and memory, turning them into ceremonies that carried both intimacy and grandeur. In noble households, birth was often marked with candles lit altars or in chambers. Chroniclers describe women of rank laboring by candlelight, with flames symbolizing protection and divine favor for mother and child. A single candle might burn steadily beside the bed, its quiet flame thought to guard against ill fortune. In these private moments, wax and fire took on meanings of hope, resilience, and fragility all at once. Marriage, too, unfolded beneath the glow of flame. In medieval and Renaissance traditions, candles symbolize unity. Two tapers burning separately were sometimes brought together to light a larger one, representing the joining of lives. Imagine a dim cathedral, the air heavy with chanting voices, while a pair of slender tapers merge their flames into a single brighter glow. For those present, the symbolism was unmistakable. As wax and wick combined, so too did families' fortunes and futures. Perhaps the most powerful use of candlelight in noble life appeared in death and mourning. When rulers or lords pass away, their bodies were often surrounded by rows of candles, the flames of vigil against encroaching darkness. Chroniclers note that the number of candles reflected both the wealth of the deceased and the reverence owed to them. At times, thousands of tapers burned together, creating a sea of light around a bier. To walk into such a chamber would have been a step into a world between worlds, where flickering fire carried the weight of grief and eternity. During funerals, large ceremonial candles, sometimes called mortuary tapers, were placed at the head and feet of the coffin. These flames, steady yet slowly diminishing, embodied both the persistence of memory and the passage of time. In grand processions, candles were carried by mourners through darkened streets, transforming sorrow into shared ritual. A city or village illuminated by such lights became a living testament to the life extinguished, echoing both loss and continuity. Monastic traditions also influenced elite practices. In monasteries, candles burned constantly before relics and icons, symbolizing ceaseless prayer. Nobles adopted similar customs, endowing chapels with candles to be lit perpetually in their honor, even long after death. These eternal flames were both spiritual and political, a visible sign of devotion, but also a reminder of lineage and legacy. A noble name, like a candle, might flicker in time, but was meant to be rekindled through memory and ritual. Candles also appeared in acts of penance. A ruler seeking forgiveness might be required to carry a candle through a public square, its flame both humble and conspicuous. The sight of a king or noble bearing a taper barefoot through a cathedral aisle conveyed contrition in ways no words could. Such gestures, though theatrical, were taken seriously by contemporaries, for the light was believed to mirror inner purification. In festivals and holy days, symbolic acts with candles reinforce cycles of community and faith. During Easter, for instance, the lighting of the Paschal candle marked renewal and triumph over darkness. Nobles often took part in such ceremonies, standing visibly among clergy and commoners alike. For a brief moment, candlelight unified all ranks, reminding participants of shared human dependence on flame, warmth, and light. There was also a contemplative side to elite candle rituals. Some rulers, known for piety or introspection, were described as spending long nights in prayer by candlelight. Imagine a solitary monarch seated at a wooden desk, a single taper illuminating parchment filled with careful script. The pool of light is small, yet in it unfolds reflection, decision-making, and a sense of fragile solitude. For listeners today, the image is timeless. One human life, one small flame, and the weight of history suspended in the quiet hours. Symbolism ran deep in literature and art of the period. Poets compared human life to a candle that burns brightly yet briefly. Philosophers wrote of wax as substance and flame as spirit. Painters captured noble figures in candlelit interiors, emphasizing the interplay of shadow and glow. Even in entertainment, masks, plays, and dances, candles shaped atmosphere, guiding not just sight but emotion. If you imagine yourself at one of these events, you might feel the quiet power of candlelight pressing in from every side. Whether in birth, union, mourning, or penance, the flame was never just functional. It was a companion, a witness, a silent participant in the most personal and public moments of noble lives. And those centuries have passed. The symbolism still resonates. The candle, fragile yet enduring, reminded all who gaze upon it that life itself is a flame, bright for a time, then gone, leaving only memory and wax. Imagine the work of an archaeologist brushing dust from the floor of a forgotten site. Among the fragments of pottery and tools, there appears a hardened lump of wax, faintly yellowed with time. To the untrained eye, it is unremarkable, but to a specialist, it represents an entire story. The quiet history of candle making. The flame may be gone, but the residue it left behind whispers of lives long past. The origins of candles are surprisingly elusive. Unlike stone or bronze, wax does not easily survive the centuries. What remains are hints, traces, and descriptions that scholars read together like threads of light in a darkened room. Ancient Egyptians, for example, are often credited with some of the earliest candle-like objects. Instead of beeswax, they dipped reeds in tallow, producing thin rushlights that burned quickly but gave enough glow to push back the shadows of their homes. These were simple, functional, and accessible, reminders that necessity often inspires invention. In China, by the first centuries of the Common Era, candles appeared made from whale fat, beeswax, or the fat of local animals. Archaeological findings suggest carefully molded tapers, perhaps used in rituals as well as daily life. The diversity of ingredients tells us something important. People everywhere sought ways to capture fire in a portable, enduring form, shaped by whatever resources their environment provided. The Roman world, however, gives us some of the earliest literary references to candles in forms closer to what we might recognize. Writers describe candles made of tallow or beeswax, set in holders of bronze or clay. These lights burned in private homes, military camps, and public gatherings. Evidence from Pompeii includes lampstands where both oil lamps and candles could rest side by side. The parallel existence of these technologies suggests a flexibility in lighting, sometimes oil, sometimes wax, always in service of dispelling darkness. Archaeological science provides further detail through residue analysis. When melted wax soaks into porous pottery or seeps into floor layers, it leaves behind chemical markers. Modern researchers can identify these traces, distinguishing between animal fat, plant oils, and true beeswax. Each discovery adds nuance to our understanding. One fragment reveals trade in imported wax. Another hints at dietary uses versus lighting. The line between candle, lamp, and food product blurs in fascinating ways. Yet for all the evidence, mystery remains. Who first thought to place a wick within wax? How many failed attempts preceded the moment when a steady flame was achieved? These questions linger unanswered, but the silence around them adds to the allure. The candle's simplicity belies centuries of experimentation. We can almost picture a person in antiquity watching a lump of fat melt by the hearth, then testing whether a strip of fiber could draw the liquid upward and keep it burning. In that small spark of curiosity, a timeless invention was born. The cultural meaning of candles evolved alongside their manufacture. In some societies, they were reserved for rituals, sacred spaces, or elites. In others, they were tools of common households. Archaeological finds show this contrast clearly. At sites of temples or shrines, wax traces often cluster near altars, hinting at ceremonial use. In domestic dwellings, by contrast, candles appear more utilitarian. Their drips frozen into corners of cooking spaces or entryways. The same object, but imbued with very different significance depending on setting. Even the wicks varied. Some were made of papyrus pith, others of twisted linen, still others of plant fibers. Each choice shaped the brightness, steadiness, and scent of the flame. A wick too thin would sputter, one too thick might smoke. These small details, lost in daily routine, become fascinating to us centuries later. They show the experimentation, the trial and error, the intimate knowledge of material that ancient people carried in their hands. Excavations across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East continue to yield fragments of this story. In Roman Britain, archaeologists found traces of beeswax candles within burial goods, suggesting they were used in funerary rites. In Central Asia, pieces of hardened wax with fibers embedded suggest candles were part of long-distance trade, carried along caravans across deserts. Every discovery widens a map, showing that the knowledge of how to bind flame into wax spread across continents, adapted and reshaped by countless hands. When we think of candle making today, it seems straightforward. Melt wax, add wick, let it cool. But the historical reality was far more complex. Ancient waxes were often impure, requiring repeated straining or boiling. Fats turned rancid quickly, demanding skilled preparer. The shaping of candles required not only knowledge but patience, for a poor mix might lead to flames that smoked, sputtered, or died too soon. Each candle that burned steadily represented hidden hours of labor. And so, when archaeologists uncover a few hardened drips, they are not just looking at residue. They are seeing the labor of hands long gone, the persistence of experimentation, and the flicker of fire that once lit forgotten rooms. The mystery of candle making is not just about material. It is about human ingenuity. The desire to hold a small flame in the palm of one's hand transcends geography, culture, and time. Picture a darkened temple centuries ago, its stone walls echoing faint chants. The air is cool, yet heavy with incense, and in the center flickers the glow of countless candles. Each flame bends and sways, casting long shadows that merge with carved figures of gods and spirits. To those present, the candle was not merely a tool. It was a bridge between worlds, the fragile light of humanity reaching toward the eternal. The symbolic weight of candlelight appears again and again across history. In ancient Rome, candles were not simply for illumination, but often tied to ritual observance. Birthday celebrations, for example, involved small cakes with lit tapers offered to household gods, a practice that lingers in the familiar act of blowing out birthday candles today. To the Romans, the flame represented life itself, a spark of vitality briefly shining before being extinguished, leaving smoke to rise toward the heavens. In Christian traditions, candles took on profound significance. By the early centuries of the Church, they were placed near relics and altars, not to provide light in dark chapels, but to embody prayer. The steady glow was seen as a visible form of devotion, a silent offering. The language of candle symbolism soon expanded. The flame became the presence of Christ, the wick a reminder of human frailty, the wax a symbol of purity. Even now, in countless cathedrals and chapels, the quiet act of lighting a candle remains a gesture of memory, hope, and reverence. Further east in Buddhist practice, candles often appear beside offerings of incense and flowers. Here, the light represents wisdom, a flame that dispels the shadows of ignorance. Rituals in temples include the lighting of rows of candles or butter lamps, their glow mirrored in polished brass and gold. The image is both practical and symbolic, countless small flames combining to create a collective brilliance, echoing the unity of the faithful. In Jewish tradition, the lighting of candles also carries deep meaning. The Sabbath begins with a gentle glow of two flames, marking a boundary between the labor of ordinary days and the sanctity of rest. The menorah, an ancient symbol of Judaism, embodies light as both guidance and resilience, recalling a story of oil that burned far longer than reason allowed. Here again, light represents divine presence, endurance, and the rhythm of sacred time. What is striking across these traditions is how candlelight becomes more than illumination. It becomes metaphor. A flame is fragile, vulnerable to the slightest breath, and yet it has the power to push back vast darkness. It flickers, but endures. Culture saw in this balance a mirror of human life itself. Brief, uncertain, but filled with meaning while it lasts. Beyond religion, candlelight also carried symbolic weight in social rituals. Medieval guilds held candlelit processions, where each member carried a taper in honor of their patron saint. In rural Europe, harvest festivals often featured bonfires and candles together, binding community through shared light. Even in private life, lovers exchanged candles as tokens, the flame representing passion or fidelity. The imagery is simple yet profound. To give someone a flame is to share warmth, to entrust them with light. Candles also became part of superstition and folklore. In some traditions, a candle burning steadily was said to confirm a spirit's blessing, while one that sputtered hinted at disapproval or presence of unseen forces. Certain colors of candles were believed to carry distinct powers: red for protection, white for purity, green for prosperity. These associations, layered over centuries, reveal how people used a simple act of burning wax to give shape to hopes and fears that words alone could not capture. The candle was also a tool of remembrance. In times of mourning, families lit candles to honor the departed, the flame representing a soul journeying onward. The soft glow in darkened rooms provided comfort, a visible reminder that absence was not complete. This practice continues today in vigils and memorials, where candles placed side by side create a collective sea of light. Each flame, small on its own, contributes to a greater whole, an image both calming and deeply human. In the language of poetry, candlelight has long symbolized fleeting beauty. Poets from Persia to Europe likened the beloved's face to a candle, glowing but destined to fade. Philosophers use the image of a single flame to explore the fragility of knowledge or the persistence of truth. Even in everyday sayings, we encounter echoes of the symbolism. To burn the candle at both ends suggests exhaustion, not where the candle speaks to value. The object itself became a vessel for metaphor. Why did candlelight carry so much symbolic weight when other forms of light existed? Perhaps it is the intimacy of the flame. Unlike the sun, distant and overwhelming, or the torch, blazing with intensity, the candle is small and personal. It sits within arm's reach, steady but delicate. To watch it is to enter a meditative state, the mind slowing as the flame bends and rights itself, repeating endlessly. This quiet quality may explain why candles so often served as companions to prayer, reflection, and ritual. As centuries passed, the symbolic richness of candlelight remained constant, even as technology advanced. Oil lamps gave way to gaslight, then to electricity. Yet candles were never abandoned. Their meaning outlived their practicality. Even today, when we light a candle, we echo rituals from millennia past. We may not always think of ancient temples or medieval guilds or families around hearth altars, but the thread is there, a continuity of symbolism carried by the simplest flame. The mystery of candlelight, then, lies not just in its origins, but in its persistence. Across cultures, across centuries, it has meant far more than light. It has embodied life, wisdom, remembrance, passion, prayer, and hope. To hold a candle is to participate in that long tradition, to join a human story where flame is never just flame, but symbol, quiet, enduring, and timeless. Archaeology often thrives on fragments. A shard of pottery, a worn tool, a faded inscription. Each becomes a clue to worlds long gone. With candles, the challenge is even greater. Wax rarely survives the centuries. Wicks decay, yet scattered traces of candle use appear in surprising places, leaving mysteries that historians still puzzle over. These remnants remind us that even something as simple as a flame has left an enduring mark on the material record. One of the earliest clues to candle use in Europe comes from a Roman site in Germany, near Augusta Vindelicum, present-day Augsburg. There, archaeologists uncovered hardened lumps of tallow, some still containing imprints of twisted fiber wicks. These were humble objects, perhaps used in military outposts along the frontier. Yet their presence raised questions. How widespread were candles in Roman daily life? And to what extent did they replace oil lamps? The evidence suggests they were more common in colder northern provinces, where animal fat was abundant, but less so in Mediterranean households, where olive oil was plentiful. In Britain, traces of candles have been found in burial contexts. At one site, residue analysis of a darkened clay vessel revealed remnants of beeswax, suggesting the container once held a candle. Why would a candle be placed with the dead? Was it practical, a light for the journey, or symbolic, a flame guiding the soul? Archaeologists cannot say for certain. The discovery remains a small mystery, a flicker of light preserved in soil. Medieval monasteries provide clearer, yet still puzzling evidence. Accounts and inventories list massive quantities of beeswax purchased for candle production. In some abbeys, candles burn day and night before altars, consuming astonishing resources. At Cluny Abbey in France, records mention wax shipped from distant regions, hinting at networks of trade sustained by the simple need for ritual flame. Archaeologists working at such sites sometimes uncover candle molds, stone or clay objects used to shape wax into uniform forms. Yet not all molds fit the standard taper shape. Some are wider, almost disc-like, suggesting large devotional candles or ceremonial objects whose exact use we can only guess. Then there are finds that resist easy explanation. In Poland, archaeologists uncovered wax residue inside a decorated bronze container. Its design resembled a lamp, yet chemical tests confirmed beeswax, not oil. Was it a hybrid form, a vessel meant to hold a candle upright? Or perhaps it was a ritual object, combining practical light with symbolic purpose. The ambiguity lingers. Objects like this remind us that categories, lamp, candle, torch, blur in practice, and our attempt to classify often falls short of reality lived centuries ago. In Northern Europe, caches of wax have occasionally been discovered preserved in peat bogs. These chunks, sometimes weighing several pounds, seem to have been stored deliberately. But why leave valuable wax buried? Some scholars suggest it was a form of offering, a votive gift left to deities associated with fertility or light. Others argue it was simply a method of preservation, keeping wax cool and protected. The absence of accompanying records leaves the answer hidden, an enigma buried alongside the wax itself. Not all mysteries are ancient. In rural churches across Europe, scholars note peculiar architectural features. Small alcoves carved into stone walls, positioned too high for ordinary storage. Many believe these niches once held candles, yet their precise purpose, illumination, ritual marking, or symbolic guardianship, remains debated. A simple recess in stone becomes a quiet puzzle, reminding us how much of daily ritual has slipped from memory. Candles also appear in unexpected contexts beyond ritual or domestic use. In medieval mining operations, for example, archaeologists found soot traces along narrow tunnels. Fragile clay holders were embedded into rock walls, suggesting miners carried or mounted candles deep underground. Yet some tunnels bear marks far above human height, where light would have been less useful. Were these marks signs of rituals performed before dangerous labor, an attempt to invoke protection? Or do they reflect forgotten methods of organizing workspaces? The answer flickers out of reach. Perhaps most intriguing are candles associated with magical or protective practices. In several early modern households, melted wax and candle stubs were found hidden within walls or under thresholds. Such deposits seem intentional, concealed with care. Folklore suggests these were protective charms, the remnants of ritual candles meant to guard against misfortune or malevolent forces. To archaeologists, they present a unique challenge. Where does superstition end and ordinary housekeeping begin? The line blurs, leaving us to wonder about beliefs never fully recorded. Even the way candles were colored carries mystery. Pigment analysis of surviving wax fragments shows traces of minerals like cinnabar, verdigris, and ultramarine. These expensive pigments were unlikely to be used for mere decoration. Did colored candles serve specific ritual purposes? Red for festivity, blue for Marian devotion, green for fertility rites? Written records rarely explain, leaving archaeologists to connect the faintest dots. The wax itself, discolored and brittle, holds more questions than answers. Through all these finds, residues, molds, alcoves, hidden caches, we glimpse a truth. The candle was never just a simple tool. Its presence in the archaeological record is often ambiguous, hovering between practical and symbolic. A stub of wax could be a fragment of light used to read a manuscript, or the echo of a prayer whispered centuries ago. The absence of clear answers invites reflection. Much of history, like candlelight itself, remains elusive, flickering, never fully still. As you imagine these mysteries, consider the archaeologist crouched in dim light, brushing soil away from a fragile mold, or testing the faint chemical trace of beeswax. Each discovery is small, almost invisible to the casual eye, yet together, they illuminate vast patterns of belief, trade, and ritual. The archaeologist's task mirrors the candle's flame, delicate, brief, yet powerful in the darkness of time. When we picture candlelight in history, the image often leans toward the romantic. flickering flames across banquet tables, long shadows on painted walls, silks glowing in warm hues. And yes, such scenes existed. But the reality of candlelight was deeply divided along social lines. For the wealthy, it was a medium of display, luxury, and excess. For the poor, it was rationed, precious, and often replaced by cheaper alternatives like rushlights or smoky oil lamps. The contrast reveals not only differences in comfort, but also profound divisions in how people experienced night itself. In the courts of medieval Europe, candlelight became part of performance. At royal banquets, entire tables were lined with tall beeswax candles, their flames mirrored in polished silver and gold vessels. Visitors described rooms glowing with what seemed like endless light. Yet, this abundance was not simply about illumination. It was a declaration of wealth. Beeswax was expensive, and to burn dozens of candles at once was akin to piling gold on the table. A French chronicler once remarked that the king's hall glittered as though the sun itself had chosen to dine among mortals. Such excess was meant to impress not just the guests present, but also the chroniclers who would carry the memory into history. In contrast, common households often relied on far humbler solutions. Many families made do with tallow candles, which were cheaper but smoky, emitting a strong, fatty odor. These were often rationed carefully, lit only when necessary. A single candle might serve as the sole light for a household, placed centrally so several tasks could be managed at once. Families gathered near it for sewing, mending, or reading aloud, while children strained their eyes in the dim circle of glow. In some places, even candles were a luxury. Instead, rushlights, simple reeds dipped in animal fat, were burned. They sputtered, smoked, and guttered quickly, but they were cheap and easy to make. To a noble accustomed to beeswax brilliance, such light would seem meager indeed. The differences extended into religious practice. In wealthy cathedrals, vast sums were spent to keep candles burning before altars at all hours. The soft golden light was meant to evoke the eternal flame of divine presence. Meanwhile, in small parish churches, a single candle might be lit only on feast days, its absence on ordinary nights a reminder of limited means. Thus, even worshippers experienced faith differently, their encounters with sacred light shaped by social and economic status. Palaces developed elaborate systems for candle management. In Versailles, for instance, wax chandeliers were lowered, trimmed, and relit with precision. Servants moved to the halls at dusk to ensure that royal chambers glowed evenly, avoiding both shadow and waste. Entire rooms could be transformed by candlelight for an evening's entertainment, operas, balls, or late-night suppers. A single night's illumination might consume more wax than a village used in weeks. The logistics required were astonishing. Inventories recorded thousands of pounds of wax purchased annually, stored, and distributed by specialized staff. Meanwhile, the rural poor often adapted their lives to the rhythms of sun. After dusk, tasks requiring light were minimized. People conserved what little fuel they had, choosing instead to rise early with the dawn. The night became a time for rest, prayer, or storytelling by fire rather than prolonged activity. Where the wealthy extended the day artificially, the poor surrendered to the natural cycle. Light itself became a marker of privilege. Who could claim the night as their own, and who had to retreat into darkness. The sensory contrasts are striking. Imagine stepping from a peasant cottage lit by a single smoky rushlight into a noble's hall blazing with 100 beeswax tapers. The air itself would feel transformed, heavy with scent in the former, perfumed with subtle wax and incense in the latter. Shadows in the cottage would creep along rough walls, broken only by firelight from the hearth. In the palace, light fell evenly across gilded surfaces, revealing every embroidered thread, every gemstone glittering in a noble's attire. One space encouraged humility and restraint, the other spectacle and display. Such disparities were not lost on contemporaries. Writers and moralists often remarked on the wastefulness of elites, contrasting their false daylight with the honest simplicity of rural life. Some even argued that too much artificial light was a kind of vanity, a rejection of the natural order. Yet others saw candlelit grandeur as a rightful expression of divine favor, proof that wealth itself was a blessing meant to shine. The debate reveals how closely tied light was to ideas of morality, status, and identity. At times, the divide created direct resentment. In moments of social unrest, chronicles describe rioters extinguishing or seizing candles from churches and noble homes. To take the light of the wealthy was a symbolic act, a way of claiming equality, if only briefly. Candlelight, then, was more than illumination. It was a social marker, a visible sign of who belonged where in the hierarchy of night. As you drift with these images, picture the two worlds side by side, the grand banquet hall glowing like sunrise at midnight, and the humble cottage where one flame sputters bravely against the dark. Both are histories of candlelight, yet they could not feel further apart. In that difference lies a story of inequality written not in words or laws, but in light itself. Candlelight was not only practical, it was symbolic, layered with meaning that could shift depending on who was holding the flame. For the elite, the candle was a marker of prestige, even holiness. For common folk, it was both necessity and sacrifice, something that consumed resources too precious to waste. These contrasts reveal how societies understood not only light itself, but what it represented: status, devotion, endurance, and sometimes even fear. In great households, the lighting of candles was an orchestrated act. Servants moved through corridors carrying taper sticks, touching flame to wick in sequence until rooms were transformed. Guests might arrive while the hall still rested in shadow, only to see it burst into radiance as chandeliers were lit one by one. The flicker of candlelight, multiplied across polished surfaces, turned an ordinary room into a stage. To witness this transformation was itself a privilege. Light was not just brightness. It was spectacle, carefully designed to impress. Yet in modest cottages, the ritual of lighting a candle carried a different weight. Each flame was measured against the week's supply. Lighting too early meant running short before market day, when new supplies might be purchased. Lighting too late meant stumbling in dimness, conserving oil or fat until the very last moment. The act of striking a flint and coaxing a wick to life was accompanied by restraint, a small reminder of the household's fragility. A flame here was no show of wealth. It was survival in its simplest form. Religious traditions amplified the divide. In grand cathedrals, wax candles were burned in vast numbers, filling chapels with golden warmth. Their light was described as divine, a symbol of prayers rising heavenward. To the wealthy, donating wax for such displays became a public sign of piety. Nobles might endow chapels with perpetual candles, flames that burned day and night in their name. But in humble parish churches, a single candle might suffice for an entire service, its weak glow casting long shadows across worn stone walls. The symbolism was no less heartfelt, but the contrast was striking. The difference extended to funerals. For kings and nobles, death was marked by rivers of wax. Chroniclers describe funerary processions lined with hundreds of torches, the night itself held at bay by fire. Coffins were surrounded by rings of candles, their steady flames meant to honor and guide the departed soul. But for ordinary villagers, a single candle placed near the bed or coffin was often all that could be afforded. The symbolism remained, the flame as a light for the journey, but the scale underscored the inequality of lives and afterlives alike. In domestic rituals, candlelight framed the rhythms of life. Weddings among the wealthy might be held in brilliant halls, candlelit banquets stretching deep into the night, music echoing against gilded walls. For poorer couples, the celebration was often timed with daylight, to avoid the expense of extra fuel. When candles were lit, they marked the most sacred part of the ceremony, a fleeting luxury, as precious as any gift exchanged. Beyond ritual, candlelight carried associations of knowledge and learning. In elite circles, scholars and courtiers were portrayed surrounded by books, with tall beeswax tapers burning beside them. Such images reinforce the idea that wisdom was illuminated by wealth. Meanwhile, in humble households, the image of a child studying by the faint light of a single tallow candle became a symbol of diligence against hardship. Both images endure, but only one was sustainable for most families. Even in festivals, the contrast was evident. Wealthy cities staged processions with thousands of lights, entire streets glowing as if daylight had returned. For villagers, festivals might involve small handmade candles carried in simple holders, enough to turn the night festive, but always limited by supply. Light in abundance was a public declaration of civic pride. Light in moderation was a humble gesture of belonging. The metaphors tied to candlelight also reveal layers of meaning. For nobles, the steady, pure flame of beeswax became a symbol of endurance, constancy, and divine favor. For the poor, the guttering flame of a rushlight spoke more directly to the fragility of life, to the way existence itself sputtered under the pressure of scarcity. Both groups used candles to mark beginnings and endings, but the experience was shaped by the material reality of what they could burn. Writers of the time were aware of this symbolism. Some moralists condemned the extravagance of elites, describing palaces where night was turned into day at great cost to the poor who could not afford a single taper. Others, however, used the metaphor of candlelight as a divine gift, arguing that abundance of light was a sign of favor and prosperity. The debate shows how illumination was more than utility. It was moral language, a visible marker of virtue or excess. Imagine yourself now walking through these worlds. In one, a noble's hall gleams with ordered rows of candles, each flame steady, as though night itself had been conquered. In the other, a cottage room glows faintly, shadows looming large, the single candle bending under its own melting wax. Both spaces are rich with meaning. Both tell us something about their occupants, their resources, their priorities, and the ways they sought comfort or honor in the dark. As you rest with these images, the lesson becomes clear. Candlelight was never neutral. It was shaped by class, transformed into symbol, woven into the rituals of life and death. Whether blazing in abundance or flickering in scarcity, it spoke volumes about who people were and how they were remembered. Candlelight did not only serve work, prayer, or ritual. It shaped leisure, performance, and the very idea of night as a space for pleasure. The difference between what the wealthy could afford and what ordinary people experience becomes especially vivid here. Through the lens of entertainment and social gatherings, we see how candlelight determined who could extend their lives into the evening hours and who remained bound to the cycle of sunrise and sunset. For the wealthy, candlelight enabled an entirely different rhythm of living. Grand feasts and banquets often began at dusk, stretching far into the night. Tables glittered with polished goblets, their surfaces doubling the light of tall beeswax candles arranged in elaborate stands. Music played in chambers where shadows flickered high across painted ceilings. Conversation flowed long after midnight, sustained by servants who replaced guttering candles with fresh ones, ensuring the atmosphere of brilliance never faltered. In these households, the day did not end when the sun set. Rather, night became another arena for status and spectacle. By contrast, the rhythm of life for ordinary people remained tethered to daylight. When evening came, most families retreated into dimly lit spaces, conserving their modest supply of rushlights or tallow dips. Leisure was modest and brief. Stories shared by firelight, small songs sung before bed, a quick meal eaten in near darkness. Entertainment, if it happened, was shaped by necessity. A candle might be lit for sewing, mending tools, or reading scripture aloud, but rarely for merriment alone. The evening belonged to rest, not to performance or indulgence. In cities, candlelight became the medium for public display. Wealthy patrons funded theatrical performances staged under elaborate arrays of candles. Whole chandeliers might be lowered between acts, their dozens of flames trimmed and rekindled before play resumed. Audiences marveled at the spectacle, not only of actors, but of the light itself. To sit in such a theater was to witness a triumph over darkness, a collective illusion made possible by the luxury of wax. Yet beyond the doors of Playhouse, ordinary citizens often stumble home under the faint glow of a single lantern or none at all. The contrast could not be starker. In private gatherings, candlelight also served as a backdrop for games, reading aloud, or intimate conversation. Gentle flickers softened faces, lending warmth and secrecy to whispered exchanges. Many romances and courtships unfolded in this half-light, the flame casting a delicate veil over expressions. Candlelight was thus linked not only with grandeur but with intimacy, a shared glow that seemed to draw people together. For wealthier couples, the abundance of light created spaces for lingering late into the night. For poorer households, a single candle might be guarded jealously, extinguished quickly when its expense felt too steep. Religious festivals amplified this divide. Nobles in great cities funded candlelit processions, where entire streets were illuminated in honor of a saint or holiday. Windows blazed with candles placed in every sill, so that the city itself seemed aflame with devotion. Such displays were breathtaking but costly, requiring vast quantities of wax. Villages, meanwhile, might gather around a single bonfire or carry a few handmade candles in procession. Both were expressions of community, but the difference in scale reflected unequal resources. The symbolism of candlelight and leisure also reveals a society in transition. To burn candles for pleasure was to display surplus, to show that one could afford light, not only for work, but for joy. Leisure under candlelight became a mark of civilization, refinement, and progress. Yet this very symbolism heightened the sense of exclusion for those who could not share in it. For the poor, night remained a time of silence and sleep, their lives still regulated by natural rhythms. As centuries passed, however, this divide began to soften. The introduction of cheaper forms of illumination, such as whale oil lamps and eventually gaslight, made evening activity more accessible to wider groups. The monopoly of the wealthy over extended nights slowly eroded. But during the long centuries when candles reigned, the flame was both liberator and divider, shaping lives according to the measure of one's means. Writers of the period often reflected on this symbolic weight. Some described candlelit feasts as dazzling, as though night had been defeated. Others remarked with melancholy on the sight of a candle burning low, wax pooling and flame faltering, a metaphor for the brevity of human life. The candle became not only a tool but a mirror of existence, bright, fleeting, beautiful, and destined to vanish. Imagine now the contrast. In a noble hall, music continues past midnight, golden light spilling across tapestries, the room alive with laughter. Servants silently trim wicks, ensuring the brilliance never falters. In a small cottage, by contrast, a single candle is pinched out, plunging the room into quiet darkness. Families retreat to bed, the night unchallenged. Both scenes belong to the same world, yet divided by the resources to extend or surrender to the dark. As we leave this exploration of candlelight's social contrasts, one theme remains constant. The flame carried meanings far beyond its glow. It was spectacle and survival, devotion and display, intimacy and exclusion. It revealed who had the power to turn night into day, and remained bound to the eternal rhythm of the sun. And as the world shifted toward new technologies of light, the candle remained in memory, not only as an object of use, but as a symbol of what light had once meant. And so, as our long journey by candlelight comes to a close, we return to the quiet rhythm of the present. We have wandered through kitchens where families huddled around a single flame, into halls where noble feasts glittered with golden beeswax, and through chapels where hundreds of flickering lights seemed to carry prayers upward. Candlelight shaped the rhythm of daily life, the meaning of ritual and the spectacle of leisure. It was both a tool and a symbol, humble and grand, intimate and public. For countless generations, nightfall was not an ending but transition, marked by the simple act of striking a flame. The glow of a candle gave people the power to push back against darkness, to gather, to work, to dream. At the same time, it revealed divisions between those who could afford to burn light freely and those for whom each candle was a precious cost. Yet in every corner of society, rich or poor, the flame was more than illumination. It was a companion, a signal, and a reminder of life's fragile beauty. Today, with electric light at the flick of a switch, it is easy to forget how radical this small gift once was. But if you close your eyes, you can still imagine it. The soft, wavering glow, the scent of wax, the way shadows stretched and swayed across uneven walls. You can imagine how, for someone centuries ago, this simple glow was both comfort and wonder. As you drift into rest now, think of that flame, steady, gentle, patient. It does not demand your attention. It simply keeps you company, just as it did for people across so many centuries. Perhaps that is why candlelight still feels calming to us, even in a world filled with brighter, harsher light. It is quiet, unhurried, forgiving, an invitation to slow down, to breathe, to settle into the rhythm of night. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, I invite you to leave a like on this video and subscribe to Sleepy Historian, but only if it truly brings you peace. You are welcome to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It is strangely comforting to know who else, across the world, is falling asleep to these same old stories. So now, allow yourself to let go. The stories have been told, the candles have burned low, and the night welcomes you into its stillness. May your dreams be gentle, and may you wake with a sense of quiet renewal. Good night.